Okay, we are going to go ahead and get started because it is 4:30. That way we can have a full work session and keep things on time here. So we're going to call the meeting to order. Welcome to anybody who is watching this work session online. Thank you to our staff who is here in attendance this afternoon. And for the public's, anybody who is watching, Board Member Sparks is just a few minutes late, but he will be joining us here in just a couple of minutes. So 1.02, we need a member to adopt the agenda, please.
I move we adopt the agenda as presented.
Second.
Motion and a second to adopt the agenda. Is there any discussion on the work session agenda? All those in favor, please raise your hand and say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Motion carries unanimously. We're going to move to 2.01. This is our NWEA data presentation, and we will turn it over to Dr. Wright.
Again, thank you for having me. Just know that we're going to do a very quick presentation, but that we will be coming back to you whenever you need us to tell you a little bit more, because I know you guys have a lot to discuss tonight. But wanted to give you a brief update of our information from fall 20 to spring 21. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight. A few of these slides may look familiar to you because it's what I started with you guys in October, just to kind of level set with the board and give you guys an idea of what NWEA is and what it's made up of. One of the things I want you to note on here, though, is a lot of the data, well, all the data that I'm sharing with you tonight is still using the 2020 national norms. The information has not come out from NWEA yet about learning during this pandemic year. So all the data we're looking at tonight is still comparing us to the 2020 national norms. Another reminder for you that remember a lot of the data with NWEA is measured in what they call Rausch units, which they refer to as a RIT. And that is essentially how tall you are on the curriculum scale. And your scores are independent of your age and or your grade. A little history of where NWEA has been in LSR7 and where we are with it now. And you'll notice the blue on this one is just to remind you that this school year brought some unique challenges in the fact that we administered, while it is an online screener, we administered it both at home and at school. So some of our data was taken in different locations. So just a reminder of that. And then one of the things that I'm really super proud of this year, and you guys can see that you're a part of this too, is that we spent a lot of time this year doing what I call level setting with many of our groups here within the district to help educate them on the value of NWEA and what we hope to gain from it here within the district. So you can see on this slide the different groups we've talked to the board, we've talked to SLT, IoT, our building admin, and different leaders within our buildings, and teachers and staff have been a part of that as well. One thing that I want to remind us is why we're doing this, and the value of NWEA is to help provide that individual data for students in both math and reading that does show growth and gaps in our learning and instruction. You can see our ongoing goals are still the same as what I shared in October, but I've added a blue area there to just remind you guys and hopefully encourage you guys. Tonight you're going to see a request to purchase or pay for professional development for ongoing learning related to NWEA. That is slated currently to be on site for part of it and for virtual for other portions of it. So we want to try and reach as many people as we possibly can with the training. Digging right into the data, this slide has a lot of information on it, so I'm going to give you just a second to digest it. One of the things that stood out to me on this slide is looking at which grade did we see the biggest difference in the RIT in all the different groups, and I noticed that fourth grade had the biggest difference in RIT between our ethnic groups, both in language arts and in math, from our lowest RIT to our highest RIT. The smallest difference I took note existed in second grade in our language arts. In meeting with several groups and looking at this data, I think this is going to be interesting to follow over time to see what happens within some of these different ethnic groups and their RIT scores to see if we can continue to work towards closing this gap. The next slide is looking at free and reduced lunch. And this one to me was interesting because you can see for the most part, they're pretty close to one another. There's not a huge discrepancy across the board. But interestingly enough, you'll notice that that fourth grade that had the biggest gap on the last one has the smallest gap in difference here in the RIT scores. This next slide, I thought this was interesting. In visiting again with some of the teams, I was trying to put together what would be the biggest pieces of information to share with you guys. So we dug in and took a look at R7 online versus in person. And keep in mind, these are the students who finished in R7 online or were enrolled in R7 online in the spring when we took the last screener. And the same thing for the in-person. It's all students who were in person in the spring when we took the screener. And you can see for the most part, again here, we had some areas where R7 online scored a little higher, and we had some areas where in-person scored higher. And this next report, this is a favorite for our teachers. They can pull this up for their students in the classroom, and it's called the Quadrant Report. And this report, all the reports I've shown you so far have focused on achievement. This report layers in growth. And so you can see a comparison here of how our students did both achievement-wise and growth-wise. You'll notice that 6th grade and 2nd grade showed growth, and 3rd grade maintained growth, while you saw others with very low growth, especially our 8th grade students. The 8th grade students are worth noting, though, because that one is a little tricky, because we do pull our 8th graders out, and I think we had about 385 that took the algebra NWEA, so that data is not calculated in this 8th grade number. But they did have, the 8th grade algebra students had a RIT growth of 11 points, with 65 of them meeting their projected growth. The next slide is similar, except it looks at reading. You can see that for the most part, we are still on the higher achievement. This one was a little surprising, though, with the growth. You can see that our growth in reading from fall to spring is something we're going to have to work on. And then finally, just a reminder that we know that this is a new screener that we're using with both our students, our teachers for many of the grade levels, and it's new to our parents. So we have provided some support for the parents. There's a link to a family toolkit on the district webpage that helps to explain some of the reports and the data that go along with NWEA. And in summary, just going back to remind you, again, the things that are in blue are the things that are new from October, but we're looking forward to, fingers crossed, that we have more consistency in the NWEA administration this school year, meaning we hope to be able to administer it at school. Except for our R7 online learners, they will still continue to take it at home. And then we're excited to hopefully offer this additional professional development this school year to continue to grow in what we do with our results and how we support our students. And I know that was very fast, but what questions can I answer for you guys?
First, thank you. Appreciate it. Anybody have any questions? I know I have a few, but if anybody wants to go first, I mean, I don't mind going first either. I'll start with a couple. What are some of the integrity measures for kids who take the NWEA online at home? I had somebody send me that question in comparison to taking it in the classroom.
Well, I think the biggest point is just educating and going back to our why. Why are we doing it? Why are we collecting this information? What are we going to use it with? And so just talking with our stakeholders who may be helping with it at home or overseeing their student taking it home, just reminding them of the value of it and why we're administering it.
And then my second question would be is obviously tonight we have another, as you noted, our reading scores were not great. We have obviously reading supports coming as part of the program tonight as well, plus the literacy resources that we got a few years ago. How will all of those play together as we look to develop essentially a comprehensive plan to help some of these particular reading scores, if that makes sense to you?
Before Dr. Wright answers that one, I just want to point out they're all above average, so they're actually high performing. The growth part is looking at what the average growth was pre-pandemic. So that growth piece is for what happened the 3 years prior to the pandemic started. That's the scale. They have yet to incorporate the pandemic scores into what a typical growth would be. So we don't know what the typical growth nationwide has been during the pandemic, but they are high achieving. So I just wanted to clarify that piece.
Thank you for the clarification. We are at the 50th percentile or higher in all of our reading scores. So we are very high achieving, and so we're looking to continue to grow that.
I guess probably a more specific question would be is as we want kids to obviously progress into higher levels of reading regardless of the level that they are at, how can we put together or make sure that our programs align with one another as we go forward, since we know that they're going to be continually assessed on this?
Well, I'm happy to report that one of the big steps that we've taken is we are provided MAP growth reports, which are special reports that we get from NWEA after each of the windows close. And one of the things that I've started doing is inviting Dr. Flack to that meeting with us so that he can see this data as well. And you're going to hear from him regarding the Wilson piece tonight. But we've started having those conversations of how do we take this and work it through our multi-tiered systems of supports to make sure we're meeting kids where they are in the process.
Okay, so I'm going to finish with my last two questions. If we're above the 50th percentile in terms of scores across for LSR7, which means we're achieving better than others in relation to grade level reading and stuff like that, who sets the benchmark for what is 50%, for example?
So those are national norms. NWEA establishes the national norms after many years of, I think it's 3 years ahead, they do data collection to establish those norms.
And I apologize. I'm asking this only because I wanted a couple of people who have been emailing some questions. So I'm going to ask the last one then too. Do we know when the pandemic norms are going to come out, since they haven't come out yet? Or is that the $1 million question? Okay.
It's been
I'll
asked.
take my check.
Yeah, we've been asking. I can tell you that each time I ask, I'm referenced to what came out in October. But I've been told that the statisticians at NWA are currently working on that. A bit of a delay simply because with the pandemic, the spring window was extended a little longer than it normally does. And so we have to wait for that spring data to come in for them to be able to really put together and give us accurate information on what we're going to find from that. I will tell you, though, in multiple calls with NWA, because I looked at our reading, and even though I know we are achieving high, Lee Summit wants to do more than just have high achievement. We want to continue to grow. And so I asked the question in talking to our NWA rep, is this common? Are you seeing this in other places? And the answer is yes.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Board Member Hedrick?
Thank you. I have a question that kind of goes along with one of Mr. Murdoch's in terms of will the NWEA be one of the tools or assessments that you utilize in the MTSS to determine when you need to implement Tier 2 or two Tier A or 3A, 2B resources for students?
We are definitely, I think the focus that I've heard most often since joining this team last year is looking at the whole child. And so instead of using one data point or one screener, we're looking at what information do we have on all of our students to be able to meet them where they are. And I think that one of the reasons we're coming to you with a request for NWEA more professional development is that we have to be confident in what we're bringing when we're looking at those students to see that we truly are using that information to meet their needs.
Well, that's kind of the other question I had in terms of the individual building data and the individual student data in terms of utilizing that, and in the training piece, what you're looking at the data, do you then, that group looking at the data, make assumptions, or how do they validate the numbers that they're seeing. Does that question make sense?
Absolutely, and interestingly enough, I was just telling my team, I spent today working on a data protocol to give our leaders at the beginning of the year to not only go through with their leadership team, but also a tool to encourage their teachers to have a starting point. Where do I start? Our teachers are getting really good at administering the test, and some of them are really good at looking at the data. It's that what's next that we're working on. And so we have growth there, and that's why I'm excited to see that we're looking at offering additional supports to those teachers and administrators.
Because, you know, you look at the data that's on the graph page, and it's page 12, but, you know, in terms of like the online students versus the in classroom, and it's like, okay, you probably could make some assumptions why that is. You see the disparity, but I'm guessing, you know, I'm really curious as to what are we going to actually, how do we actually operationalize that and really truly identify what's causing some of the variances we see or the differences in the scores?
Absolutely. One of the things that I was looking at today when working on the data protocol, and another, I guess, plug for NWEA, is that when a teacher walks into the classroom next year, they can pull up their class and see where their kids are. We're not digging back into a file to see where they were. So if I want to pull up my first hour and say, okay, do the quick quadrant report for my kids and see, okay, here's my low achieving, low growth students, I know I need to really focus in on that group of kids. And then not only looking at that, that gives me a quick at a glance, but then taking that and moving it into the goal areas. Why is that kid low achieving? Why is that kid low growth? What do we need to work on specifically with that group of students and or small groups of students to move them out of that? That's another great tool within NWEA, is it gives you goal areas. So you can look and see, is number sense a struggle for this group of kids? Is that what put them in the low achievement? Because it breaks it down by their goal area for them to see where we need to start.
Okay, so part of the response to that would be maybe additional or a different type of resources, or could it be the teachers changing the way they instruct in that particular area, or both?
You just described MTSS.
Okay.
It's meeting
right.
the kids where they are and providing what they need. And I think we had our, like I said, we had our growth report call this week, and the person who led our call was a principal in Pennsylvania. And when she followed up with me after the call, she provided me a link to some, I think it's through the Smithsonian, some leveled text that kids could use that identify or match their RIT. So it's a place where it meets them. And then within the math, there's I think it's called Mappers through NWEA, that allows a teacher or a student to type in their math RIT score, and it assigns things that they can practice at that level. Awesome. So we have work to do. I mean, I don't want to come up here and make it sound like we've got all this figured out, but that's what we're working to help our teachers grow and know how to use those tools and to meet those kids where they are.
Awesome, thank you.
Board Member Fritchie.
Thank you. Try to keep it quick here. I had some of the same questions Dr. Hedrick had, but just one. Looking at the same page, page 12, I found this graph really, really interesting because, especially in reading, it actually shows that the online academy students, in most cases, are scoring just a little bit higher than the in-person students on those graphs. What does that tell us about the effectiveness of our online instruction? Do we make any conclusions on that?
One thing I've learned this year looking at all the data that I have is during a pandemic year, I look at data as more of a point of inquiry versus a verdict. Mm-hmm. And so I definitely think it's something we have to look at and continue to watch over time to see if that maintains or if it changes. This is 1 year of data, a fall to spring comparison, so I would definitely keep it as something we monitor.
Okay, thank you.
Board Member Allen.
Thank you, Dr. Wright. Quickly, the first page said something about 2020 norms, right? So, and the statement was made that we're ahead of what national norms and averages at 50% or better. You know, is there an overlay chart that has some comparisons there, or is that even a consideration where that bottom left number on page 13, where 8 is low achieving, low growth, is that at or, I understand that's at or above norms, but I'm curious if there's a scatter map that shows where the national norms are that overlays this thing.
if you don't mind, Dr. Rao, I'm gonna start with that and let you finish it. So what's interesting about 8th grade math is that some districts will give that to all students. Some districts will give Algebra 1 to all students, and then some districts are like us, and some kids get Algebra 1, some get 8th grade. So 8th grade math, out of all the data sets we are showing you today, is the only one that's not apples to apples, so it's really hard to actually show on the 50th percentile or below or above on either of the axes, just because people treat it differently. They give Algebra 1 or 8th grade.
We've opted at LSR7 to give our 8th graders the algebra NWEA versus the 8th grade math.
Well, I mean, okay, so let's take 6. That's above, the norm or what have you. So the quadrants are right. The quadrants are the national norm. Is that the point? All right. The 2 lines are the national norm.
Yes.
Yeah,
And
okay.
I have, if you guys want me to provide it to you, NWEA puts out a national norm chart.
Okay.
The caveat that I give you is just to remember it's where kids at the 50th percentile are. We want our kids above that, but you can
Sure.
kind of see if they were at the 50th percentile, what RIT score they should have at that point in the spring or whenever they take the screener.
All right. Thanks.
Other questions for Dr. Wright? My last question for you would be around the professional development that you mentioned for staff. In previous years, has there been any requirement in terms of the usage of NWEA data by staff outside of providing a lot of times the scores and the comparisons that we get in, like, for example, parent-teacher conferences and things like that?
It's varied right now, and that's one of the things I want to do this year is to work on level setting that. In the data consults that I was part of in the spring, it just made me so happy. So many principals are talking about it. I mean, it's what they wanted to talk about, and I don't think it was because I was in the room. I think they're proud of it and that they're looking at it. We have varying levels of comfort with it, though. And I'm proud of some of our administrators reached out last year and said, hey, will you please come out and walk through this with me? I want to talk to my teachers about it. I want to be able to help them know what to do in their classrooms with this information. So that's our focus this year, is to level set and really go back and make sure that we have that strong foundation to continue to grow.
Appreciate that.
Bless you.
Any other questions from board members regarding NWEA? Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Wright. Appreciate it. We will move on here in the work session to 2.02. These are our board promises. Some people call them norms, obviously, that we had in 2020. We are revisiting those to make sure that they are still applicable to our board meetings and our work as board members as we go through the 2021-22 school year. So ultimately for the board members, this is really open to just general comments. If there's anything that you want changed, if there's any additions that you would like made to this or anything that you think that we need to address within that particular document, this is the time to be able to voice that. Does anybody have any comments regarding those? Board Member Fritchie?
Thank you. I think when we talked about this in our board retreat, we had one that we wanted to consider adding to this list. Is that correct? I think it was praise in public, criticize in private. Was that, am I getting that verbiage correct?
We did discuss that at the retreat, yes.
Okay, I just wanted to put that out there to see if there was any comment on that, if we all felt that was one we wanted to add to the ones we have on our list.
Anybody have any comments on that one? I mean, I know we talked about it obviously at the retreat as one that might be beneficial for us. We can certainly add it unless anybody has an objection to it.
I would say I think we should add it.
Okay. I would tend to agree that we need to add that one. And I will offer one other one, and we can continue talking just in general. At our board president workshop, one of the things that we talked about is, and I'm guilty of it too, so I'll be the first to step on this landmine, is to make sure that we, whenever we can, to keep our phones away while we actually are in the meetings. Was one of the things that they addressed in our board president workshop. So that might be something else. Board Member Sparks.
I do believe that it's correct that we did talk about it in our board retreat. The only concern that I have with that is if there are things, I don't want to be bound to not being able to address my colleagues if I feel like I need to address something in a public format. And so I understand us praising in public and criticizing in private, but I believe that there could be times that possibly I may need to. And so I just want to put that out there, that is a concern that I have, that if I did so, then behind closed doors, it would be, well, you're not keeping the promise that you made with board promises.
And I think probably in this particular realm, and I could be wrong on this, I think it more is going to refer to decisions as we're going. Like if we're in a debate on a topic here and we disagree, absolutely, let's do it. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And in questioning, why we might be going one direction or another, even as individual board members, I think that's perfectly appropriate. I think it was more targeted towards once the meeting has concluded, the decisions that have been made and stuff like that. So, but I understand where you're coming from on that particular point. Board Member Campbell?
I think I was just going to mention, I think definitely there are times when we have a difference of opinion in a debate situation or in conversations of the topics that we have in the meetings, and definitely agree that being open to disagree and open to express points and counterpoints, I think that's really important. But the criticizing part, I think the benefit of that is just like if we had a comment that we felt like we wanted to make to Dr. Buck or to someone sharing with Dr. Buck on his team, that criticizing in private around things like that, there's a benefit to all of us kind of following that as a board promise. But I totally agree with you, Board Member Sparks, on the fact that we need that ability to disagree when we need to.
Board Member Fritchie? No? Just joking. Board Member Sparks?
I would agree with that. I just wanted to make that clear so that if I do it, that there's no violation of the promise.
And I think we should actually write it in there, right? That we're really referring to after the decisions and meetings have been made. I think that's a more applicable way to put that particular statement in there.
And I do think we need to add the point about staff, or not criticizing staff, doing that not doing that in a public forum.
Okay, I got that as a note too for us here. Then you got board members. You'll get the updated list here. Okay, so Vice President Marshall.
Thank you, President Murdoch. I do agree that you should be specific on what we're talking about when we're talking about votes and all of that. But I think we all should remember too that the reason that this came about was just a reminder and the overarching tone of just decorum, because we are going to disagree with one another, and we should be able to express our disagreements, not in a negatively criticizing manner, because there is constructive criticism, and I believe that all of us have thick enough skin to accept that, and then find the common ground and move forward. So the criticize or don't criticize in public should not be a deterrent for us to challenge and push each other on our thoughts and what we're trying to get accomplished, so that we all can make decisions in the best interest of our students.
That's a very good point. Anybody else on board promises? Anybody have any other thoughts? Yeah, Board Member Campbell.
I really appreciated last year that when we got the final decision on these, that we printed them and we each signed them. And to me, that was a great moment to all agree and sign on to those board promises. So I would encourage that we do that again.
Coming in August. It's
Awesome.
already on.
Okay.
Already
Thank
on
you.
there. Already
Yeah.
on there.
I was going to say that too. I totally agree with that. Thank you.
Preview it as a movie. So, yeah, that's true. That's true. Dr. Buck just sent over, just remember the Tony Stansberry line, the tough on issues, soft on people kind of thing. So that's a good reminder as well. Kind of goes in the same vein here. Anything else on the board promises? We'll get the addition to that, and then, like I said, those will revisit for approval here in August. Okay. Okay, we are going to move on here to 2.03. This is our board priorities. Okay, we're going to go on to board priorities here. 2.03, which is our 3 board priorities. These are, again, something that we discussed in the summer retreat, and we did not want as a board, unless there is anything pressing here tonight, we did not want to make any major changes to them, especially coming off of the pandemic school year. Anybody want to offer any thoughts on the board priorities? Is there any changes that are necessary to the board priorities? I have an overarching comment that I'm going to make it once everybody is done on these. There we go. I knew that might spur something, right? So, Board Member Allen.
We've talked about this, not real segue, but building blocks toward dignity, belonging. We may want to add that into the very first point. If we're literally working through that as a leadership team, administration, the book that we worked through and studied and talked about at the retreat. Or somewhere. It doesn't need to be in the first, per se. But dignity and belonging, nobility, those are pretty overarching, strong themes that can incorporate quite a bit of this list.
Do you have a particular suggestion on how you would want something like that worded?
No, not really, actually, to be completely honest. But in thinking about the conversation, if we're headed in that direction, and we talked about the importance of those terms at length, I think it's probably worth marrying that somewhere here.
Just working off of your suggestion, I mean, it does seem to fit even more in point 2.
And it may be, yeah.
You know, an innovative practices, student well-being, dignity and belonging, and accessibility to educational opportunities. That might be something that, as a board, we could play around with. That's not a good word. If we want to add that particular
Wordsmith,
phrase,
so to speak,
yeah, wordsmith that to where it really makes sense to go along with where we're headed with the equity plan right now. And again, this is something that we will see in August again for actual approval. So, it's tonight. I thought we had put it on. Okay, there we go. We can fix that either way. So, so we could probably push that to August to make sure that we get the wording correct on it. Other thoughts on the board priorities? My one comment, and board members, you can feel free to disagree or correct me if I'm wrong. I think it's important for the public to understand on our board priorities that we have 3 board priorities and that they are not ranked 1, 2, 3. They each are priorities that need to work together in order for our district to be successful. And I think that, and I'm sure that you all have gotten a lot of the comments, just like I have, that we are ranking something ahead of something else. And I think it's important to just understand that we have 3 board priorities for the upcoming school year, that we want them to be utilized and acted upon and work together so that we have a successful school year. And we need all 3 of those things to happen for us to have a successful school year. So I think that's important. Board Member Allen?
Yep. Sorry to jump in again there, President Murdoch, but in that vein then, or in that spirit, then when we hear reports and discussions, we tend to say first, second, third. So we might as well just, go 3, 2, 1 or whatever. I mean,
they're not numbered on here.
No, they're not. No, I get that. But when we hear a report, it's like, hey, our first report or priority is going to be number 1. So let's maybe report those differently through the year.
And I'll add, we with board leadership, we talked about rotating which one we do each month, and we're going to talk about that again next month. But if we keep the same format of how we report out, well, we're going to take turns which one goes first, and not have a ranking or a number, since there is no ranking or number.
Board Member Fritchie?
Yes, I just wanted to emphasize that too. I think you all have said done a really great job. But we spent quite a while talking about these in our retreat, And we specifically talked about rank and order and all of that kind of thing, and how that we definitely going forward did not want to rank these or number these or anything of the sort, and that they are all have an equal emphasis in our view. And so I'm glad that we have already discussed some ways that we can approach that in the future, and hopefully there are some folks listening to us in this discussion tonight and will understand that these are not, one is not more important than the other, but all are equally important to us.
Any other comments or questions on the board priorities? Thank you, Board Member Fritchie. Okay, we are going to move on. We're just moving right along here to 2.04. This is the legal RFP that was out and now is here in the work session. And we will first turn it over to Dr. Miller. Are you just going to do a summary here for us, or
Brief.
is this just a Q&A?
This is just a brief summary.
Okay, perfect.
So again, as President Murdoch suggested, we went through and we had a formal request for proposal for comprehensive legal services. As with all RFPs, we have a dedicated team process, so we have a submission of proposals. In this case, we elected to conduct interviews, and we have before you recommendations. We had a board member sit on this team, as well as several different administrators within the district. Overview of timeline. So initially, this RFP was issued in April. It came due May 18th. We only had 2 law firms submit proposals. We did not feel like that was significant, so we put that back out. 8 law firms then submitted by the updated deadline, and then from that submission, we assembled the team. The team was able to clearly review and identify bond counsel from the submissions. We selected 5 firms to move forward to the interview process for our consideration for general counsel. Team interviews were held on the 30th. We sought additional information and recommendations made July 7th. Again, tonight will be the board work session, and then we plan to bring forward our recommendation for decision in the August board meeting. Overview of for general counsel. As you can see here, we did interview 5 different firms. 3 of the firms have offices here in Kansas City. 2 are located in St. Louis. 4 of the firms are smaller, and they have an educational focus, and 1 firm is a national firm with a variety of attorneys from different areas of expertise. 3 of the firms have current or previous experience with the school district, and 2 of the firms have no prior relationship with the school district. So this slide, I think, is really important. While administrators access legal counsel, they really represent the Board of Education. So we're really mindful of that, and our team is very mindful of that. So our RFP team is recommending a select list of law firms to provide those comprehensive legal services. And we feel like it's Dr. Buck working with board leadership and after the input from the board members to select attorneys to represent the Board of Education. So the proposed law firms, Gilmore Bell, Gwen Mundorf, and Spencer Fain. Again, Gilmore Bell, we selected or proposing for bond counsel. Ben Thompson is the attorney that we've worked with, and they are our current bond counsel. Gilmore Bell's fees, I'm just going to give you a chance to review this. Bond counsel fees are a little bit complicated when you review them. And I will share that Gilmore Bell held their fees firm for 5 years, the years that we had them. They're holding those same fees for the upcoming 5 years. So that's significant. Gwen Mundorf, one of the 2 firms that we're recommending as general counsel. Here's the 4 local attorneys in the Lee Summit area. So why did we select Gwen Mundorf as one of the firms that we're recommending to move forward? First and foremost, the professional development that they offer is robust, and that was a standout compared to the other law firms. Not only do they provide statewide presentations, they have a regional back-to-school meeting. They're connected with our local chapters, such as Kansas City LACE, cooperating school districts of the greater Kansas City. In addition to that, they have a training track series for a variety of instructional and operational leaders that occur throughout the school year. And then what they do is they work with school districts to tailor individual training. So that was a unique standout portion when it came to Gwynn-Mundorf. Fees for service, they were the lowest of the 3 firms that we went and negotiated fees for, and they held their fees for all 5 years. They're local, they're readily accessible, and they have a history of success serving LSR7. Gwynn-Mundorf fees are here as present. I'll give you a second to look at those. Spencer Fain is the second team that we are recommending, and here are 4 attorneys that have represented the district on educational matters. I will add that we have also accessed a number of other attorneys for highly specialized areas that are not on the sheet. So the rationale for recommendation for Spencer Fain, they're a national firm. They have a strong educational team. But they also have a breadth of attorneys that we have accessed for personnel matters, regarding employee benefits, regarding construction. So having a deep bench, sometimes we have specific areas of need that fall outside of that traditional educational lane, and it's been helpful for us in the district. Cost comparison, and I'll have a slide here for you. They held their fees for years 1 and 2, and then again at 3 and 4, and then a slight increase for year 5. Again, they're local, they're accessible, and they have a record of supporting the school district. Here's an example of what those fees look like. Give you a second to review those. I will add, as a national firm, there is a difference between the 2 law firms and their fees. A small educational Missouri firm versus a national firm. When you look at national firms, it's not uncommon to see attorney fees range anywhere from 200s to 700 plus. We received one quote where it was, the average fee would be $530 an hour. So there is a difference in cost, but I at least wanted to present that to the board as well. And really, pending your discussion this evening, we plan to present those law firms to you in August for decision. And I'm happy to open up to questions you may have at this time.
Thank you, Dr. Miller. I appreciate that. We do have an opportunity here to ask Dr. Miller questions related to this process, if you would like, and kind of how it has ended up coming to this particular recommendation. So, Dr. Hedrick?
I'm just looking at the score sheet in terms of, and so I just have a question in terms of the ranking. Like, do you mind to go back to that? Do you have that slide up there or not? Otherwise, I'll just kind of ask my question. Sorry, Dr. Miller.
Which slide?
It's this one, this sheet right here.
Oh, yep.
Okay, so it shows like Tooth-Keeney, it shows a 2 and a 3. So is that like representative of 2 individual scorers, or tell me does that question make sense, what I'm asking?
Yes, so, and I'm gonna, Krista, if I say this inaccurately, please correct me. So initially, right after scoring, their initial score was third, and then we negotiated some terms with them, and they moved up to number 2. Is that accurate? Okay. They ended up tying with Mickus O'Toole after negotiations.
Okay, so then my other question would be for both Tooth-Keeney and Mickus O'Toole, did the team do any analysis of their hourly rates?
We did. We did do analysis of their hourly rates, and they were both above Gwynn-Mundorf.
I'd be curious. I'd just be interested to see what they are, mostly in comparison to Spencer Fain, because we're taking, really in terms of the ranking, the 4th and 5th ranked firm and awarding something above these other two. So I do think that's important for us to have full knowledge of what their hourly rates are running.
So, no, I appreciate that question. One of the things I'd like to add is it's the difference between, so Gwynn Mundorf, Tooth Keeney, Mickasotool, and Ed Counsel, all four of them are those smaller firms, educational firms
Right.
that focus on education.
Right.
It's the deep bench with Spencer Fain where we could access a broader variety of attorneys. And we will
Okay,
provide that
so
information.
I do think that's important, but I guess then the other question that I would have then is, in terms of the services and the types of legal work that's needed for the district, would we, and maybe this is not a good question I should ask, so if you don't want to answer it, just say you don't want to answer it at this
Okay.
point. But I guess I'm thinking, would we then take a more comprehensive look at what different types of legal services we need and try to utilize as much as possible the lower priced firm?
And I think that's discussion between Dr. Buck and board leadership on how they want to advise administration to use firms.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions or comments related to the legal RFP? Board Member Fritchie?
Thank you. I had that similar question too, because as I was reading through all of these documents before our meeting, I was thinking to myself, okay, our experience ever since I've been on the board for the last 4 years has always been with basically one firm. And we use that same attorney for everything, or at least the board side we do. And so if you're recommending that we use two firms, right?
Since I've been a district administrator, we've always had a list of firms that we can access. Just like currently, we have Spencer Fain and Tooth Keeney.
Okay,
Now, we have been given guidance, or it's evolved so that we primarily use one firm.
right,
So, but we, again, administrators would take direction on
okay.
how we access firms.
Well, I'm not for being mutually exclusive, you know, to one firm or another, but that was my question in my mind was, okay, for board purposes, as we go into closed session and we need those attorneys and we need those attorneys here for our meetings and things like that, which one do we decide to use and for what reasons? And so the thing you want to avoid is using one firm for one thing, you want one meeting and then another one for another one, because, you know, you need that breadth of information.
Consistency.
And that consistency
Yeah,
there.
it goes back to that slide at the top, right? The attorney represents the Board of Education, and, you know, again, I feel like that's outside of the purview of the RFP team, and that's a different level of decision-making.
And you know, we had a long discussion, obviously, among all of us within the RFP team about the pros and cons of all of these firms, and they all, unless I'm mistaken, they all interviewed obviously very well. You know, with some of the different experiences that some of us have had with the different firms and the specializations that some of them bring, it was one of the reasons that we needed to bring this up for everybody in the board to understand that if we were going to add somebody essentially as another approved law firm, that we still as a board need to talk through this, which is why we're here tonight, and be able to figure out essentially who would we want to represent the board in meetings, in our legal updates, to be with us in the closed sessions for those kinds of things, understanding that by approving another firm to work with our school district, that a lot of those other items they would be able to take to that particular law firm. Am I understanding that correctly? And of course, we could go with that law firm too. It doesn't mean that we have to stay with our current law firm. We can absolutely move if that's the will of the board. But it was one of those things that we needed to talk about because ultimately, if you look through the scores, they're very, very close, with the exception, obviously, as Dr. Miller noted, the cost difference, which is where you see a difference. And it's also one of the reasons that we wanted to make sure and highlight, and again, somebody on the team can correct me if I'm wrong, we wanted to make sure and highlight the huge difference in terms of the professional development that Gwynn Mundorf can bring to the table, and by the way, that we're already utilizing. And so we do already get to utilize some of those services, and I think that's an important component to recognize as well. And that's one of the reasons we need to have that discussion as a board. Did I miss anything on that? Okay. Board Member Sparks?
In this process, was there any community stakeholders that was involved in this process?
No, it was board representation administrators.
Is there a reason why we chose not to involve any community stakeholders in this process?
I don't know that we generally, from our RFP team selection, that's always part of our process.
Okay.
Board Member Marshall?
Thank you. Just a quick question, Dr. Miller. When looking at the scoring sheet with Mickus O'Toole and Tooth Kinney, I noticed they have the same score. And the hugest, or the largest, I guess, difference in their scoring was with the cost comparison. Is that the main reason why one was recommended over the other, or are there other?
You're saying Tooth Kinney and Mickus O'Toole?
Yes.
Neither one of them are being recommended to move forward.
Okay, thank you.
And I think one thing, Board Member Sparks, since this is a work session for our discussion, I think you bring up a good point on having other people within the RFP. And in this particular case, because a legal firm is going to be representing the district in complex legal matters, it would be hard for a community member who isn't familiar with what's going on throughout the district to be on a team like that when we did have very specific questions for that team, and understanding some of the sensitivities of those topics that were already being discussed.
So with that being said, you're saying everyone that's in this group, from business services, human services, everyone on this list, that they are aware of the sensitivity or the sensitive information?
They're aware of some of how they're using the firms and what they would need to use the firms for, if that makes sense, how they would access the attorneys and what some of the subject matters that they would need to access.
From a
broader perspective, yes, sir.
so
Yes.
not any detailed information?
No. It's how you're going to access and what those specializations that they might need from the different firms would be.
And do we feel that that there's not any community stakeholders that could be part of that dialogue or discussions?
I'm not sure how we would incorporate community members into our district RFP processes to begin with. And I mean, we could ask, Krista might be able to answer this better than I'm going to be able to at this particular point, but the RFP process is one, as we've been going through, it's not something that we would be bringing community members in, since we are a district entity, essentially, on our own. We use our IonWave platform to get our proposals back, and so it's up to the district to select who we want to work with us. It's not necessarily the community selecting who's going to work with us. It's one of the reasons that we'll end up making those decisions.
Board Member Sparks, I want to correct myself. There are specific RFP teams. I want to say the CFMP, when we selected architects, I think we did have some community participation, but this is a highly administrative selection. And as President Murdoch suggested, we really wanted to have team members with unique expertise in the questions and understood the issues that we were addressing. But on second thought, I do think we have some teams where we do bring some community members in.
Okay, thank you.
Board Member Allen?
Yeah, thank you, sir. So with this discussion, Dr. Miller, we're allowing really some latitude where we may not have had some latitude before, maybe. In a way that we can let a boutique firm really do and utilize their specialty as opposed to a broad brush, possibly. I don't know if I'm really posing a question, but.
Yeah, can you clarify your question?
Well, so we're looking in RFP for priority of our general counsel, right? And yet allowing the possibility of flexibility for a boutique or a specialization to come forward and assign that specialization where it needs to be assigned.
So that's a possibility. So, Gwen Mundorf, in a variety of educational topics, they can touch on human resource needs, they can touch on business needs. There's a lot of experience. But for example, construction, reviewing AIA contracts, or some specific negotiations, we might need someone a little more specialized. Sarah McMillan has had to access some attorneys to really look at drafting plans for HSA or HRA accounts. So
Right. Sure.
I hope that's helpful.
It is. I mean, I guess you're not going to ask a rabbit to climb a tree, right? I mean, we've got to have the attorneys doing what they do best.
Right.
And so I really want to make sure we have that flexibility. And none of this pigeonholes us into using only one or the other.
I think
correct?
that's the reason why the recommendation is as it is. So we've got a firm that's looking at just educational issues, but we also have the ability with a second firm that has educational experience with this district, with a broad bench in the event that we need additional support
Okay.
resources.
Yep, thanks.
Other questions or comments regarding the legal RFP? Okay, Dr. Miller, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Board members with 3 minutes to spare. That's pretty good. That's well done. So, just a kind of final note. You guys will see. We will have a recommendation coming in August, and it'll be kind of imperative over the next month or so that we hone that recommendation for what the board would want in terms of counsel as well, and we can continue to communicate with Dr. Miller on that point.
Can I just ask a
Yeah,
question
sure.
then along those lines?
Uh-huh.
Do you anticipate the board will have a conversation about, does the board want to specifically identify legal counsel for the board? Does that make sense what I'm asking? So
Yes, and yes.
Okay.
Because I think we absolutely need to identify who we want to use as a board. Yes,
Okay,
absolutely.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you. I just
Uh-huh.
wanna
No
clarify.
problem at all. Anything else here before we adjourn the work session?
I just would
Yeah,
like
go
to know
ahead.
what is the time framing on that.
So the board meeting will come in late August. I believe it's like August the 20th. Well, it's the 22nd, I think, or something like that. Is that right? I don't know. 19th. Sorry to everybody watching. I should have that memorized. But so the 19th. So we will need. Are we doing an off month work session? What? Third. So we probably will need to revisit it one more time as a board to make sure that we are putting a recommendation down for the August board meeting. So we can actually discuss even with Dr. Buck here on whether or not we want to do that work session, or we can do it through communications with Linda. Okay.
Thank you.
No problem. Anything else? Okay, this work session is adjourned, and we will see everybody back at 7 o'clock. Thank you very much.